Okay, so John has got his next test ride on Saturday. So we're hoping that the weather stays okay. It's been a bit showery.
Well, I'm off 165 kilometres, new tyres, new shoes, which is hopefully going to reduce the hot spots.
And it also means that he's including some of the ride that he'll be doing for his 200. And sometimes that is a good way to bring confidence to a race if you can get on a course and actually ride it and test it.
This time I was trying to do an imperial 100, so 160 kilometres, 100 miles. And it went really well actually. It was much better than the last ride. I felt better. I probably set off a little bit slower, but I also did a flatter route, but perhaps more relevant, it wasn't a route with a climb towards the end, so the finish of this route was much flatter. The weather was really good, so that was also very helpful. I felt like I'd hardly trained since the last long session, and that's true. I hadn't really done much training. I'd done one hardish interval session, and all the rest had been fairly easy rides, and that's really to Clare's credit. She'd backed everything off and made me take it easy, and I think in the past I'd have felt that I'd had too much rest and felt that I should have been doing some training, but I sort of, having her, I trusted in her judgment, and it came out really well. I've only ridden more than 100 miles a handful of times, and last time I did that was in Mallorca at a training camp, probably when I was in my 40s or maybe even in my 30s, so like maybe around about 20 years ago, and that was in a group. And certainly this has been the longest that I've spent sat on a bike. I think eventually the ride took me 7 hours and 37 minutes, so nearly 8 hours. And in those days, I probably could ride 100 miles in, well, maybe around 6 hours. So this brings other challenges, and I was pretty worried about it when I first set off. The eating and drinking went a lot better. I kept it simple. I just had gels and the odd bar, and I just had 2 gels an hour, so that was 60 grams of carbs per hour. It's quite a lot of gels, but I've got a fairly solid digestive system, so I didn't really have any problems with that side of things. I had also had about 3 or 4 bottles of drink mix, so I had quite a lot of carbs in that ride, and I think that made a big difference in keeping me going. One problem I did have though was going to the toilet or urinating. I think that probably is due to the saddle, so I need to look into that. I noticed that my bladder was pretty full, or at least I had trouble fastening my shorts when I'd got changed at the end of it, so that showed that something had expanded down here, and obviously that's not a very good situation to have. I've not really had saddle problems like that before, although I had to have had some numbness. Anyway, so this is a slightly different saddle. It's one of these Sella SMP saddles, and I haven't really used it for long rides because it was upsetting my hamstrings at first when I first got it. So I need to either tilt. I'm going to try angling it first, although of course if it's something that goes wrong on a very long ride, it's not easy to test, but I'll try changing the angle of it, or I might just change it for a different saddle. I've got a few spare saddles that I can try. Something that worked really well was the caffeine gels. Later in the ride, I was feeling a bit sort of dizzy or light-headed or tired after maybe about 6 hours. And I thought, oh, well, you know, this is not really that good. And I tried a caffeine gel, and the caffeine gel is just like magic. And I had a few caffeine gels towards the end of the ride, and every time I had a caffeine gel, I felt much better. So early on in the ride I tried one, and it didn't really make a big difference, but later on these things were making a huge difference in how I felt and giving me a good boost. And Claire's found the same when she's been doing long ultra distance running events in the mountains. She's found that the caffeine gels make a big difference. A few things other than the saddle that were a bit problematic was my wrist and my upper body felt a bit sore. So I think I probably need to spend a bit more time in the gym, or some time in the gym. I've really neglected that. I was going to see a physio, personal trainer, and that was making a big difference, but I've neglected it as I've changed to a different physio. So that's really something that I need to work on, particularly my upper body and you know, to wrists, and probably get some aero bars so I'm in a different position on the bike. The other thing that's been hanging, although it didn't cause me problems during the ride, was my big toe on my left foot. I've got a really wonky left foot because I damaged the ligaments down the inside of my left ankle. And I realised that later in the ride I was getting a bit sore around the first metatarsal joint, so this joint on my, or this joint actually, and on my foot. And that was a consequence of using my toe to stabilise my foot, so I need to change my cleat position a bit. I got some new shoes because I've had problems with hot spots, and I got some Lake shoes which are really adjustable, Lake CX242, so you can adjust the forefoot and the midfoot fastenings independently, and they're sort of all separate bits, so it allows you to loosen off around where I get a lot of cones on the outside of my foot. So that made a big difference as well. I didn't really have any problems. My feet were a bit achy at the end, but you'd expect that. So that was it. It went really well. I'm really pleased with how it went. I feel fairly confident I can do a 200 now in December, whereas before I was thinking I'd have to push it out to January. Just hopefully I get another really good day. And we moved it forward to get a bit more daylight. So I'm going to try that on the 3rd of December, hopefully if the weather's good, and see how that goes. And that would be my start of my Randonneur Round the Year. It's not going to be plain sailing from here, but I think we've cracked a few of the problems, and now we just need to get the training going and see how it goes.